Back to the post office scandal. I mean, I have to say, I'm still quite blown away by the conversation we had with a previous guest who was, among those, who were victimised by what happened in the post office scandal with his father. And this is Varshas Patel, his father Vipin Patel. I mean, the death threats, wanted dead or alive signs, a cross erected. And some of this was just blatantly racist against his family in their local village. Absolutely horrific. His father thought about suicide on a couple of occasions. Thank God he didn't. Other people did commit suicide. The question we're asking today is, now action, we're looking, action seems to be about to be taken. There's going to be some form, some way of, on a mass scale, exonerating the 700 plus branch managers, sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses who've been wrongly convicted of thieving and fraud when they didn't do anything of the sort. It was a faulty computer system that the post office and Fujitsu, who ran it, knew about. So mass exoneration, speeding up compensation, and these people being able to clear their names. But the question I'm asking today of our audience, and put it to you again, is why do you think it takes an ITV drama about the post office scandal for our politicians to act? There's no new information in it.
There's no new information. I think it's because our politicians have been bound up for so many years in trivialities, in internal party nonsense a lot of the time, and have increasingly
debates about Partygate.
Debates about Partygate. I mean, that was supposedly the biggest scandal of our era. Meanwhile, this one is not actually being talked about. I think it is an indictment of our politics because of the fact that politicians are increasingly sort of detached from the issues that affect everyday people, as well as from the things that really matter. I mean, there should be an incentive as a politician to see an injustice like this and to really run with it. That should be something that's rewarded. That should be something that's seen as the height of public service. And yet just kind of climbing the greasy pole, putting a good video out on social media where you really, nail the Tories on something or whatever it might be is what is supposedly makes you a good or a bad politician. So there's all kinds of different layers to this. There's all people who owe these people an apology, but at the same time...
It wasn't going to help your career, basically.
It wasn't going to help your career. It wasn't a enticing issue for Westminster, and it really should be, because these are people's lives.
I mean, it's been pointed out by my colleague at The Sun, Harry Cole, that, people say, oh, why isn't the media been talking about this? The reason why TV made a drama about it, because it had been in the papers an awful lot. We covered this starting a few years ago, and I held my hands up at the time and said, you know what, I should have been covering this sooner. It was a complicated story. It didn't move on and develop in lots of ways, and you sort of, on a breakfast show where you've only got sort of 7-8 minutes for a segment, it takes you 5 minutes to explain the story almost. But that's no excuse. And I said, I feel that, I failed there as a journalist. Should have gone on to it more. But there were so many people. The Times can hold their head up high. They were writing about this for 15 years, far more articles than any other paper. But, so journalists, you have been exposing this. And MPs were aware of it. And there's that ITV drama showed, Mr Bates versus the Post Office, that there were some really good MPs who were really doing their best, now Lord Arbuthnot, a Tory MP, among them, but, many others from many other parties as well. But this is part, isn't it? We can say, oh, let's get these people compensation. Let's make sure they haven't got criminal convictions. But you're not going to take away the damage to their lives that's already happened. Marriage breakups, those who lost loved ones to suicide, losing their livelihoods. I mean, all of the things you'd have planned, your retirement, people paying back money they hadn't actually stolen to the post office, still sitting in post office coffers, by the way, millions of pounds. It's happening on such a big scale. They needed that money then, and how that money would have perhaps grown in their pension pot and, the sort of life they would have had, very, very different. So the compensation that's been handed out so far, on average, like 50 grand, doesn't touch the size. I mean, again, add a few zeros, guys, before you get into the realm of it. But I don't want that to come from public money. I think that should come from Fujitsu. Or, take it out, frankly, let's take some out of the bonuses paid to the board at the post office. The worry about this is, and we discussed it a bit earlier, there's long lines of, the contaminated blood scandal, NHS trust scandals where patients die, is that this closing ranks, this sort of, let's just look after ourselves and our bonuses and our pensions and our reputations. Reputational damage to an organisation being more of a concern than someone being wrongly accused and convicted of a crime. How did we get to a position where that is kind of how pretty much all of our businesses and public services are now run? Because I can't think of one, whether it's social services, like NHS trusts, schools, who don't actually put their organisation first.
No, it's shocking. I just think all the scandals that envelop the police or all sorts of different things that one could reach for.
Don't let on about the rapist police officers.
This is a story as old as time. I think the thing is that there are always going to be people, unfortunately, who feel that incentive to be a company man or woman, to look at what's in their immediate self-interest rather than what's in the broader public interest. The question is, how do you counteract that? Do you have proper democratic oversight and accountability? And also, one thing that's been striking when you were talking to Paul Scully, the former Post Office Minister, earlier, was the fact that even when the state recognises a great injustice, it's so sclerotic, it's so slow, it's so confused and poorly run that it does things like hands over the compensation payments to the post office.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally like handing over the decisions on claims to, to the person who robbed you.
It's insane. But this is the nature of the beast that we're dealing with. So not only is there not that accountability,
was it ministers that decided it? Was it
inequity.
civil servants? Again, I think civil servants always get off scot-free on this. Everyone's going after Ed Davey, the now Lib Dem leader, over his failures when he was Post Office Minister, and Mr Bates wrote to him, Alan Bates of Mr Bates versus the Post Office fame. Even he in interviews has said, look, it's not just him, it was everybody.
Yeah.
And again, Ed Davey says he was lied to by civil servants who said, no, the post office have assured us everything's fine. So the post office lied, but the civil servants, they're culpable as well. We never seem to have any comeuppance for all these people. For me, I think it's not just people losing a CBE. That's just a trivial thing. Yeah, symbolic thing. But it is... I do think that we fundamentally need to get to a situation in public life and in things where there is a culpable personal responsibility and that people face criminal prosecution for not doing the right thing when it is obvious that they did know there was wrongdoing. And again, we asked this earlier, how do people sleep at night? Knowing that people are being wrongly convicted of serious crime like theft, losing their livelihood, losing their job, losing their reputation, and some even their lives. And how do you go, yep, fine, done my job well, but don't worry, I've got a nice pension and a promotion. How do they sleep at night?
It's outrageous because they knew that this was going on, as we were talking about earlier. They knew that this system was screwed up. They knew that it had all of these... They were constantly trying to patch the coding because they knew it was producing all these ridiculous outcomes. They knew that from out of nowhere, they used to be dealing with pretty small cases of discrepancies and potential fraud and whatnot, where suddenly it was this enormous industry where hundreds upon hundreds of sort of lower middle class business people suddenly, had their hands in the till. It was absolutely ridiculous. They knew it was ridiculous. They were constantly back covering. And yet, because of all of the perverse incentives that we've been talking about, they just carried on with it.
Yeah, exactly.
And they need to be held to account for that.
Absolutely.